For our final work of surrealism, I wanted to look at this work by Max Ernst called Europe After the Rain. Ernst served in the German army in World War II and was injured. While he was on medical leave, he attended lectures on psychiatry and psychoanalysis in Cologne, and he became interested then in Freudian psychoanalysis and then moved to surrealism. He began this painting during World War II. While he was in exile in France, he was horrified by his experience in World War I, and so when World War II broke out, he decided to flee Germany. He actually was rescued by Varian Fry, an American who headed up the Emergency Rescue Committee, which smuggled artists and intellectuals out of Europe in the 1930s and 40s who were in danger of being persecuted by fascist regimes in Germany and Italy and their occupied territories. What we see here in this painting, done a few years before the end of the war, is the vestiges of European civilization completely gone, covered with molten lava. We have two figures in the center, Ernst in the guise of this kind of birdman here, and a female figure beside him, looking over this apocalyptic landscape. The process that Ernst used to paint is called automatist decalcomania. Automatism is thinking about a more subconscious way of applying pigment to canvas to create to tap into the unconscious, something that's more unconscious, less intentional. Decalcomania was a process that Ernst developed in which globs of pigment were applied to canvas, and then wax paper was overlaid, and that wax paper then creates the patterns that we see here in the pigment as the pigment is kind of pulled up into the different channels of the wax paper. In many ways, World War II was an apocalypse for Europe. And because of the terrible destruction it brought, avant-garde artists like Ernst came to the United States, and the focus of the art world really shifts to North America and to the other side of the Atlantic. But before, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves in our story here, because I want to go back and talk about an American artist who works, who kind of go back to the interwar period and talk about Georgia O'Keeffe. We think about works like this when we discuss Georgia O'Keeffe, but initially she began with these works of precisionism when living in New York City. Precisionism is also called Cubist realism. We can see the influence of Cubism and Futurism here, but with sharper, cleaner contour lines and space that is not nearly as ambiguous. We also have American subject matter here. I mean, New York skyscrapers, what could be more American? But in the 1920s, O'Keeffe leaves New York and she moves to the American Southwest and actually lives in Santa Fe and then on her ranch outside of Santa Fe that you can still visit today. And here, she really elevates the ordinary, a flower, to the extraordinary. O'Keeffe says she wants her viewers to confront what they might otherwise overlook. When these flowers were first shown, though, people were shocked by their audacity, because what the audience saw, what critics saw, was sexual content in their delicate contours, the organic forms, the lush surfaces, even though O'Keeffe herself denied any association with female genitalia. All right, let's move on to modern architecture, one of my favorite subjects, because I actually think that it's in modern architecture where we really get a clear sense of the innovations of the avant-garde. And we're going to focus on two different currents within modern architecture. International style, what's also called the machine aesthetic, and architect Le Corbusier is the main proponent of this movement. And then we're also going to look at the Prairie School, which then becomes organic architecture that is championed by American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Let's start with Le Corbusier's very almost kind of understated design, but something that is so crucial to understand all modernist architecture, and that is his Domino house. It's the model of a modern structural framework in which walls are no longer load-bearing, but instead we see steel I-beams dispersed throughout the structure, holding up steel reinforced concrete platforms. This means that with walls that do not have to take a load-bearing responsibility, there is a lot more flexibility in how you arrange and organize the interior space. It also means that the outer wall, also not load-bearing, can become a wall entirely made of glass. This type of wall that is not load-bearing is called a curtain wall. Think about a curtain. It has no structural integrity. It's not structurally important for the window. And similarly here, we will see the use of curtain walls in modernist architecture. All of this type of building really relies on what's called Taylorism or Fordism, which is essentially the modern assembly line. The idea of producing different pieces, different necessary modules for a house, and then quickly assembling the building on site. And European cities after World War I, they needed affordable mass housing. They needed this kind of approach to building that could provide modern, clean, comfortable homes for the masses. Here's a comparison to think about the difference between the domino model and traditional construction, in which walls play a key role in the structural integrity. Oops, okay. Le Corbusier's most famous house is Villa Savoye, outside of Paris. And we see the key elements of international style, or the machine aesthetic, highlighted here. There's no decoration. We see simplified, streamlined, geometric shapes. In fact, Le Corbusier said a house is a machine for living in. There's no attempt to incorporate the house into the natural surroundings. And there's also no attempt to hide the industrial material. It's steel railings that you might find on a ship, barren concrete floors. There is a kind of utopian search here for streamlined, modernist, rational design. I think this image here shows us how the use of the curtain wall can really fuse interior and exterior spaces within the house, where we have this big curtain wall, right? Floor to ceiling window, because the wall itself is not load-bearing. Instead, the load-bearing here is on this steel beam. And so you open up the window and you create this kind of seamless flow from interior and exterior. And instead of having that pitched roof at an angle, when you have a flat roof, you can also build a garden terrace at the top. Alternately, Frank Lloyd Wright advocated in the United States for what is now called organic architecture. he was interested in creating a total environment that merges with the natural world and harmonizes with nature. Wright supported the role of mechanized production in architectural design, but didn't believe that buildings should resemble machines. And look at this house outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. The house itself uses natural stone quarried from the site with these concrete balconies that protrude to create the same kind of horizontal lines we see in this rock outcropping and beautiful location here over a waterfall. It's as if this house has always been here. It's that fully incorporated into the location. Like I said, Frank Lloyd Wright is also a modernist architect. He's not rejecting modern innovations. For example, we see here in this curtain wall how Wright has given us all of these little window panes right at the corner here so that you can open up the window and really bring those natural surroundings directly in. You can also see as well how a lot of the floor is just polished stone. There's a huge kind of bedrock boulder here that the house sits on, and it becomes the floor for the actual house. When we look at these two works side by side, the differences, I think, are striking. Where we're still relying on modern materials like this steel reinforced concrete that can suspend without any supports over the waterfall, or the curtain walls in both designs, but very different in terms of its relationship to the site and how modernism is being interpreted.